Do you remember that time a few years ago when people were arguing if FGC is broke or not? Say what you will, and there's a lot to say, but I certainly wouldn't get that impression after looking at the game prices. In fact, fighting games might be one of the more expensive genres to get into. If you want to get into some popular genres, most of them will have a free option that you can just download and play without ever paying real money for actual meaningful content. Even games like Battlefield and Call of Duty stopped selling DLCs because it made people leave the game. Instead, you get battle passes, which sucks, but at least nobody has to pay for new weapons or maps. All of that stuff is free. Meanwhile, anytime a new fighting game comes out, you're looking at 60 to now 70 bucks for the base game. And if you're not getting an even more expensive edition, prepare to drop another 25 to 30 bucks for every subsequent season. Not to mention that you're still getting paid battle passes, but instead of BP subsidizing the free content, like in other games, you're still paying for the DLCs and for the battle pass if you want the cosmetics. It's a somewhat ridiculous situation, both for companies and the players. So in today's video, we want to talk about why fighting games don't really justify their price tag, and why it's contributing to the genre staying as niche as it is. Now, for obvious reasons, the value of things is a fairly subjective topic. There are people who would gladly drop hundreds if not thousands of dollars on their favorite video game, just because it means so much to them. Yet, someone might love the game just as much and still wish for it to be entirely free. However, individual preferences don't matter when you're competing with thousands of other games, and your potential audience consists of millions of people. You have to appeal to the average customer, which is a part of why the gaming industry settled for fairly consistent price brackets. The majority of indie releases will generally hover at around 20 to 30 bucks. Then you get the AA games that typically ask for 40 to 50 bucks. And finally the big dogs, the AAA games. They used to cost 60 bucks for the longest time, but now we're also getting $70 releases, and potentially even 80 in the future. For this video, the important part is that when you put your game into one of these categories, you will be compared to other games that cost just as much. And this is not a comparison that fighting games want. We mentioned this in a previous video about graphics, but when people see the premium price, they expect a premium product. And there are a lot of factors that go into this. How does the game look? How does it sound? How much content there is? How good that content is? How long does it take to beat the game? Even the post-release support is something to consider. The whole package needs to be as good as it reasonably can be. So let's take a look at what fighting games actually offer. If you played more than a few fighting games, I think you already have a decent idea about where they excel and where they fail. Now, there's a good and the bad thing about this. The good thing is that generally, the best part of any fighting game is the one that the core fans of the genre actually care about. The combat system, the online matches, lobbies, practice mode, etc. The bad thing is that despite all of the above being the best part, we can still name so many exceptions. Region locking, inconvenient lobbies, shaky netcode, subpar practice mode, bad ranking systems, and so on. If even the best parts are often flawed, what can be said about everything else? Single-player content has been neglected for the longest time. While we see some improvements with things like Grand Blue's RPG mode and Street Fighter's discount Yakuza clone, the situation overall is still pretty dire. If anything, some of the games from 20 or even 30 years ago have been putting more effort into offline content. New player onboarding is still incredibly bad. Much like with the competitive scene, fighting game publishers offload the heavy lifting onto the community, with content creators and players making better guides and tutorials than the company that actually wants you to pay for their game. Moving on to the presentation, it's understandable that lower budget titles tend to struggle in this regard. Great art style, fluid animations, and high fidelity require a lot of time, money, and skill. But while fans can understand why small companies like Arica, French Bread, or 18 can't compete with Capcom or Bandai Namco, someone who isn't tapped into the genre will just see a game whose looks don't match its price. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of an average gamer. Both of these games are 60 bucks. Ignoring the gameplay differences, which one do you think looks like a better deal? Another issue here is that Japanese publishers in particular tend to have issues with regional pricing. The recent Fatal Fury launch is a great example of this. While they did adjust the price in some regions, it was still much too high in places where SNK is more popular than anywhere else. SNK effectively ignored the people who supported them the most. These mistakes are especially frustrating for anyone who wants to see the genre flourish. Fighting games are particularly sensitive to the pricing issues, because the less people can get into the game, the less people you have to play with, which leads to worse matchmaking and worse player retention. And by the time the sales get steep enough to look appealing, the player base has all dried up. Even getting your friends into fighting games can be a challenge. Not only is there a steep entry price, but also a character they like might be locked behind DLCs, with no good options of trying them out for free. This one is actually quite important because so many fans of fighting games might not have even gotten into the genre if they didn't have access to the character who would become their lifelong main. Naturally, just fixing the price by itself doesn't solve everything, it's only a part of the bigger picture. However, this has been such a frustrating and persistent issue with fighting games that we felt like highlighting it for a potential discussion. As always, thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like or subscribing, and we're curious to see how you feel about this topic, so please share your opinion in the comments. Cheers!